There we go. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name's Elaine Mattingly, and I am here to welcome you on behalf of the Grant Wood Country Forum. It is a combination art, history, and culture conversation, ongoing, a 6-week series this year, every Tuesday, with through our host, the Cedar Rapids Public Library, in the heart of what is known as Grant Wood Country. We love having you here. Each week, we will have different guests who have their own particular relationship to Grant Wood, his art, and this area to give us updates and hopefully spark some inspirations and some conversations. We'll also have recommendations for those who may want to write creatively, short fiction or poetry. Um, if you know of anyone who would like to join us, you may feel free to share this information as well as the Zoom link that you have. This is all free, and we all do it for the love and the enthusiasm to keep this spark alive. Um, so as we go through our 6 weeks, we will get to know each other. We will share this what we speak about with the world on the Cedar Rapids Public Library's YouTube channel. Thank you very much. We will gather creative writing and anything that people would essays, anything that people would like to write about for inclusion in our Grant Wood Country Chronicle. I'm happy to report that we have lots and lots of creative writing to include in this next edition. Um, and basically, it's not a competition. If you feel compelled to write something about your experience here, whether it's informational, an essay, a short blurb, poetry, just submit it and we will make that work so that your voice, authentic voice of what you have come to know and understand about Grant Wood and Grant Wood Country and your experience gets out there. We love that. Um, Also, if for the more competitive minded, I do want to let folks know that this forum, we're in our third year of sponsoring the Grant Wood Poetry Prize through the Iowa Poetry Association. And again, last year was the first year it was judged by, the category was judged by Tim Fay of Wapsie Almanac fame. And last year and this year will be judged by Iowa's poet laureate, Vince Gutera. And he actually requested to judge this category because he himself has embraced some of Grant Wood's work prior to our sponsoring this prize. So we'll meet him on our February 11th celebration session. He'll pop in and share some of his poetry and how he how he's embracing his role as Iowa's poet laureate. So that's exciting. So yeah, we got some things to pull for everybody, whether you're interested in the art, the sites, the area, the culture. We want to encourage you to um, listen to our presenters, let it spark questions. You can use the chat. You can just observe. So we'll roll around in this. Uh, so speaking of presenters, I am so tickled that we have curator Julia Jessen from the Cedar Rapids Public Library tonight. Oh, I'm just so happy about that. And in fact, for you creative writers, uh, I might suggest three artworks in particular. And Julia, by the time you listen to Julia, I'm sure you'll have more um, inspirations, but just several right off the bat that might have some synergy with her presentation would be Mourner's Bench. Maybe she's going to mention that. The Corncob Chandelier, and Grant Wood's drawings, illustrations for Sinclair Lewis's Main Street. So she'll be focusing her remarks on his multimedia impulses, and he's prolific, so there's much to discover. And once things are all discovered, we're going to have Ronell tell us all about the act of officially discovering and compiling um, all things Grant Wood with the catalog raisonné. Oh, that's so exciting that that is actually officially happening. And those of you who get the University of Iowa's uh, magazine may have noticed a really nice article about the project recently, but I won't say much about that because Ronell, we want you to weigh in on that and share all that. So if we could start with Julia, um, that would be great. And Julia, please don't be shy. I would love for our group and anybody who would watch us on the channel to tell us a little bit about your role, your background, and your relationship to the museum and curating and just all the things. So,
Sure. Yeah, well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm the curator of collections and exhibitions at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. I started there in July of 2023, so about a year and a half now and loving it, which is great. And I'm actually from Iowa. I'm from North Central Iowa. I did my undergrad at the University of Iowa, and then grad school at Syracuse University in Central New York. And then prior to this position, I was over at the Museum of Danish America over in Elkhorn, Iowa. But really happy to be back in this area and get to spend time with artworks and yeah, really delve into Grant Wood, which has been really wonderful over the past year and a half. So very excited and very happy that I get to share with you tonight. So I'll go ahead and share my screen if that works, if it's time for that.
sure.
Okay, perfect. All right. So tonight I am looking at Grant Wood as a multimedia artist, though in a different way than we typically understand that term today. Grant Wood worked in multiple different mediums throughout his career, and I wanted to use examples from our collection at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art to illustrate some of these mediums. Before we jump in, I also wanted to give just a little reminder that many of these artworks that I'll discuss tonight are also discussed in greater detail or through a different lens, different thematic lens in our Grant Wood in Focus series of presentations, which can be found on our YouTube page. So if you haven't checked those out before, you might find a lot more interesting information there as well. So feel free to check those out and a lot of other great content there too. So I've organized this presentation roughly chronologically, just so we can get a little more of an idea of when he's working in these different mediums and think a little bit more about that. And I wanted to start really early on with some very early watercolors. As a refresher, Grant Wood was born in 1891 in Anamosa, and then his family moves to Cedar Rapids in 1901 when he's about 10 years old. His father had passed away, and his mother moves his family to Cedar Rapids, where she had relatives. And these are, like I said, early watercolors. Watercolors not normally something that we associate with Grant Wood. We typically think of him with his oil paintings. But keep in mind, at this point, he's in his early teen years, and oil painting would have been something kind of beyond him at that point. Not his first thought of materials at all. But watercolor was easily accessible and it was fairly easy for him to work with, although it has its own difficulties. It can be pretty unforgiving as well. So I've got three examples here to share with you. The first two are coming from roughly 1904, not firmly dated there, but about 1904. This is Beat, watercolor on paper. This is from when he's about 13 years old, and it is pretty accomplished for this age. He's working again with those very simple materials, simple paper, and a simple subject matter as well. Of course, we've got this vegetable form of this beet, something that he would have been familiar with both on the farm and in Cedar Rapids as well. And it's a very easily available subject for him to focus on. We do see him doing some interesting things even at this very young age. He's already starting to kind of model these leaves, give them a depth on this very flat surface. The beat form itself still stays pretty flat, but he's definitely exploring and starting to kind of push the bounds of what he can do artistically from this early age. Also dated from 1904, although it seems to be perhaps a little bit farther along in his progression as an artist, is this branch of apples, also in watercolor and ink on paper. So he's incorporating more highlight here. He's created more of a rounded form for these apples. The leaves still maintain that really nice modeling that he's created. There's a sense of three dimensionality here. There's light and shadow playing on those leaves. And he's pictured this against this strong black background that makes the colors pop even more. And so it feels like he's progressed a little bit farther along in his artistic development. But throughout, even at this age, he's still very firmly looking at the world around him. And of course, we see him doing that throughout the rest of his career as well. And then finally, in these early watercolors that I'm showing you, this piece from a couple years later in 1906, Woodland Waterfall. And this piece is clearly dated. We can actually see that in the lower right corner where we've got that little '06 there to tell us when this piece is coming from. And here he's really challenging himself to create a composition showing space through scale. He's able to show that kind of sense of three-dimensional space that extends backward, using scale and kind of making pieces smaller in the background to create that sense. All of this is happening with this moving water as well that's cascading down. He's got these splashes coming up, reflection that he's creating as well. And this is all happening over boulders and framed by this lush foliage. So at this point, it really is quite sophisticated and fairly complicated for someone who, during this time, is about 14 or 15 years old. So even from that age, doing some really interesting things artistically. Moving then into some metalwork. So a few years later, looking at this Volund shop bowl from about 1914 to 1915, he graduates in 1910 from high school, and then he studies briefly at the School of Design, Handicraft, and Normal Art, which is now the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and then moves to Chicago in 1913, where he pursues a career as a metalsmith and a jewelry designer. He works for a couple of years at the Kalo Silversmith shop before founding his own shop, the Volund Shop or Volund Crafts Shop with Christopher Haga. The shop was named for the Norse god of silversmiths, and they produced handmade gold and silverwares and jewelry, including this piece that they've created using copper with a silver overlay. They created pieces that had a really strong influence from the English arts and crafts movement, and that was evident in their simple, undecorated, hand-finished surfaces that could be found in a lot of their forms, including this bowl. And you can see that texture that's created is from that hand hammering that they would do on the surface of the bowl to create that texture. We also see some of that copper coming through in the detail as well. Also from this period, a necklace from 1915, copper and mother of pearl, from the Lund Craft Shop again, and probably also created with Christopher Haga. And again, that arts and crafts influence is at play here, along with a bit of perhaps Art Nouveau influence coming through, and the influence of Grant Wood's previous work with the Kalo shop on their jewelry as well. Looks very similar to some of the pieces that were created by the Kalo shop as well. Unfortunately, due to World War I and the decline in interest in luxury goods, the Volund shop would go out of business after only about 18 months, and Wood would then return to Cedar Rapids. However, he would continue to earn income well into the 1930s with these more kind of decorative projects. So this is really something that sticks with him, and these lessons that he's learned through this earlier work really stay with him. He would furnish homes in Cedar Rapids, and although he would see himself primarily as a painter, his ideology and his visual vocabulary would stay really grounded in arts and crafts. And we even see that later in his later paintings. where he'll use flat decorative patterns and intertwined organic forms, and also through his belief that art could be a democratic enterprise, something that was accessible to average people and not just to the elite. So, those are things that he carries on with him throughout his career. And a piece that he creates after coming back to Cedar Rapids, a little disappointed that the company didn't make it. Again, that timing was bad. Luxury goods were not moving, but he continues to explore metal work when he comes back. And this is just one example from that time. He creates this hanging lampshade with a peacock motif. Um, I also wanted to show you this piece because of the inclusion of both wood and stained glass here as well. He's created the silhouette of peacocks with a cutout metal form over this colored glass. And here I'm showing you just a couple of working images of this piece. Still very much in that arts and crafts tradition. It has this really strong handmade quality to it. And there you're seeing it all lit up as it would appear on display. This is from a previous exhibition, so not currently up right now. But thinking about how he's starting to incorporate wood here, I did also want to mention the mourner's bench, as you might have suspected, as an example of a piece created in wood that Grant Wood worked on. This piece is from 1921 to 22. It's made of oak and then carved and stained. And here we see a lot of that sense of humor, as well as those craftsmanship abilities that we've been talking about, really starting to come through here. It resembles a medieval church pew, and it was something that he actually created along with his students at McKinley Junior High School, where he was teaching art. So this piece was created to sit outside of the junior high school principal's office and be used by students that were sent to that office for discipline. And you can see the text there, the way of the transgressor is hard. So it was meant to be this area where students sat and mourned the deeds that had brought them to that office. We know that he had help from the students in carving the bench, but he did create the heads himself and a bit of the backrest as well. So he made these kind of grotesque heads up at the top, and you're seeing a detail of that here. So very kind of tongue in cheek, a lot of humor coming through here. And that's something that we also see kind of going on and through a lot of his other works as well. Moving a couple years later, I wanted to turn to some work that he does for the Turner Mortuary in 1924. Um, so, in the fall of 1924, after a 14-month study abroad that he had taken, the Turner family, David Turner and John B. Turner, were moving their family's mortuary business from its location in the Edward Mansfield House to the larger Sinclair House in downtown Cedar Rapids. And David Turner asked Wood to convert this turn of the century mansion into a modern funeral home, which would later become the Cedar Memorial and now the History Center. There's a photo of it as it stands today. But in the fall of 1924, Wood and the local builder Bruce McKay got to work on remodeling the mansion and turning it into this very appealing and functional setting for the Turner mortuary. McKay was a self taught architect, and so he built an addition for the chapel, and Wood selected and even made some of the furnishings for the interior, also supervised the work of other craftsmen, and completed a lot of the detail work himself. And he also created plans for the landscaping of the grounds. The Turners were extremely happy with the outcome of the project. And to further promote the opening of the business, David Turner would commission Wood to create a series of pen and ink and pencil drawings, which is what I wanted to show you, of the interior and exterior of the mansion. So here, looking at some drawings that he did in pen and ink and pencil. These would be published in booklet form in December of 1924, and they served as kind of an advertisement to promote this new mortuary. And I'll kind of just run you through some examples of what these looked like. Lots of little, very kind of charming vignettes of different spaces, different faces of the Turner mortuary. These were really lively renderings of the interior and exterior scheme, and they helped to illustrate Wood's ability to sketch and envision his decorating projects for clients. The Turner Mortuary itself and Wood's work that he did on the mortuary were very well received by the public. And as a result of this commission, Wood gained a great friend and supporter in the Turners. And he also gained a studio and a home, an old hayloft and coachman's quarters to the carriage house on Turner's property, 5 Turner Alley. David Turner was greatly impressed by Wood's attention to detail and his artistic abilities, but he had also seen that Wood really kind of lacked some of the business acumen to be able to manage his financial affairs and thought that he could really benefit from a dedicated space to create his art. And so Wood promptly transformed the old hayloft into an artistic haven where he could live and work. And this would eventually allow him to resign from his teaching position at McKinley Junior High School. The years that he would spend at 5 Turner Alley from 1924 to 1935 would be some of his most productive in his career. And speaking of that space and these little things that he created for the space, these very inventive things that he did for that space, I wanted to mention another piece. Again, thinking about his use of wood, reusing older materials, incorporating glass and paint and fabric as well, and talk about Door to 5 Turner Alley from 1924. So when visitors entered the studio, they would come in through a front door, which he fashioned from a primitive coffin lid with a glass window. This was, again, meant to kind of incorporate that humor of Grant Wood and be this humorous reminder of the mortuary next door and the hearses that were below. He also painted a playful clock on the glass, and around the edge of the clock is lettered, Grant Wood is returning to the studio at, and a revolving metal arrow, like the hand of a clock, pointing to either his time of return or options such as is taking a bath, or is having a party, or out of town. And no less attention was placed on the surface of the door, which he covered with linen fabric and textured paint, and then he glazed it an antique bronze green color. So, again, really inventive, really creative things that he was doing in kind of all aspects of his life, all of these little details. Even from the doorway, giving a sense of what you would expect when you stepped into his studio, kind of entered over that threshold. And it served as a real conversation piece as well. Also from this time period, just the next year, Lilies of the Alley from 1925. Again, something where he's being very creative and inventive and reusing kind of old materials too. So these are made with earthenware flower pots and found objects. And they were created during his last year of teaching at McKinley Junior High School. Um, 1925, he's kind of in this interwar period, this period between the wars. And he almost seems to be injecting humor into this kind of modernist aesthetic, perhaps even a little bit of kind of a Dada influence here, which was an art movement that often incorporated satirical and kind of nonsensical forms, um, and also used a lot of found object art as well. He never specifically connected them to that art movement that was happening in Europe and New York at the same time. But he was aware of these things that were going on, and it's possible that that could have played a role here too. But he was just, in his nature, very inventive and created things from materials that he found lying in the alley outside of his studio, like these clothespins and shoehorns and bottle caps and old gears that you see here. And there are these really interesting forms where there's this interaction of lines and masses made up of twisted wire stems and those found object blossoms. They create these really interesting shapes in space. These were given to friends as gifts, and they also decorated his studio. And so it's kind of representative of his desire to create art out of humble materials. And while being very frugal, they also demonstrate his resourceful and inventive nature, and may have also served as a way to demonstrate to his young students at the time that art could be very playful and fun, and also come from anywhere. And speaking of that kind of playful and fun nature, another piece created in metal from about 1925, brass piece, a self portrait of the artist. This brass relief derives from a plaster self portrait that he first created. And he started with a version in clay initially. Then he made a mold and cast 100 copies in plaster, painted them in antique gold, and then gave them out to friends as Christmas gifts. Eventually, the portrait would be cast in metal during the artist's lifetime, and then much later, it would also be reproduced after he died. And so there are subsequent later castings after the work, but this one is established as being one that Wood created during his lifetime. His sister, Nan Wood Graham, would say that they were made so his friends could, quote, carry him around in the palm of their hand or in a pocket, or simply use him as a paperweight, end quote. So the self portrait really clearly resembles Wood as he appeared in the 1920s and also brings forth a lot of that humor and self deprecation in this three-dimensional portrait. He clearly seemed very kind of endlessly inventive and witty and had all of these really creative and unique ideas about making things and gave them out as gifts as well to people in his life. Another one that was mentioned at the very beginning, the corncob chandelier for the Iowa Corn Room from 1925 to 26, made of copper, iron, and paint. And another instance of him being really inventive with his forms. Um, with this, he had been hired by Epley Hotels to decorate the dining rooms for hotels in Sioux City in 1927, Council Bluffs in 1926 to 27, and Cedar Rapids also in 1926 to 27. So for the Hotel Montrose, which is now demolished in Cedar Rapids, he was inspired by the harvest time Iowa landscape. So he created large canvas panels of corn in the fields that he painted in place with the help of Edgar Britton. And then the corncob chandelier, which he designed, was also fabricated with the help of the blacksmith George Keeler and still maintains that interest in arts and crafts, that kind of handmade quality, and also this relationship that he liked to include between the furnishings and the architectural elements within a space. So he really created kind of an environment that sort of encompassed you within this space. And he's also working in this very archetypal Iowa subject matter, um, something that he would become really interested in. And of course, I have to include an oil painting in thinking about his many different materials that he worked in, many mediums. And I chose to focus on Woman with Plants from 1929. It's one of his first works where he really starts to move into a style influenced by the lessons that he had learned from the Northern Renaissance during a trip to Munich, Germany in 1928, so just before he creates this piece. And in this work, the visible brushstrokes and the dappled sunlight of his earlier impressionistic work are replaced with a smooth surface and a new solidness in his trees and hills and figures. It has a very kind of Renaissance portrait style, and there I'm showing you a couple of additional examples from Hans Memling and Pietro Perugino. So stiffened outlines. The faces have descriptive details, but the costumes are quite simple. Half-length seated figures against these landscapes in the background. So all things that he's drawing from this Northern Renaissance portrait style. It was a portrait of his elderly mother, Hattie, who was 69 at the time, and she looks far off to the left, has a lot less engagement with the viewer. She feels like a specific woman. There are enough details that give her that specificity, but made kind of monumental and iconic. She becomes a symbol for something greater than that specific portrait. It's very kind of tightly rendered, but then the background is a little bit more loose, although he maintains those hard edges. And here in the details, you can see she's wearing a cameo that Wood had bought for her in Europe. And Nan would go on to wear the same cameo when she modeled for American Gothic. She holds the flower pot close to her body and cradles it protectively. And there's kind of a wistful or a melancholic feeling that's created here. The background is very stylized and the figure appears more naturalistic. The background is also in kind of an autumnal season, symbolic of this rich life, which is nearing its close. He also incorporates a lot of detail in the hands and the face with that deliberate stylization and patterning in both her dress and the background. So he gives a lot of character to those areas while the remainder of the painting feels more stylized. This piece seems to feel more about the Midwest and depicting the Midwesterner. So, again, trying to find this kind of archetype of what Midwesterness looks like. She holds a snake plant in her hands, which was known for its hardiness. And here it's serving as kind of an attribute, again, something drawn from Northern Renaissance portraiture, meant to represent the sitter's resilience and strength of character, which were both things that he associated with his mother, but also with the idea of the Midwestern pioneer as well. This was the first work of his to be accepted by jury for the annual exhibition of American painting and sculpture at the Art Institute of Chicago. And the local community also really liked and supported this piece as well. He made a special frame for the painting, which he covered in an old linen tablecloth to evoke the past, the feminine, and the home. And he's really still kind of experimenting at this point. He's moving in that kind of regionalist direction, but still figuring it out, still kind of reaching for what would end up becoming his mature style. This painting failed to win a prize in the competition, but 1 year later, when Wood entered American Gothic in the same competition, the painting caused an immediate sensation and it would go on to be purchased by the Art Institute. Since I am focusing on those materials and mediums, I also wanted to touch on his process here and how that ended up affecting these materials. So, the technique that he's using, which was also inspired by the Northern Renaissance, he's using 7 or 8 coats of very thin glazes on composition board, and then several coats of varnish on top of that. However, he was a little pressed for time, and so he tried to speed up the drying time for each layer by using an electric heater. And even as he was doing that, as heat blisters were forming, he would kind of carefully push them back down into place with his finger. But over time, of course, things kind of didn't work out so well with that sort of method. And over time, small flakes of paint were slowly lifting up on the face of the portrait, right in the middle of her cheek. So Wood himself actually had to do some restoration on the painting in 1940. And then to try to slow down the deterioration of the painting further, the museum actually had a conservator from Minneapolis in the mid 2000s do work on this piece to carefully readhere those lifting flakes through a process called consolidation. And the conservator that did this work had really extensive knowledge of Grant Wood and his work. So he was able to do this very deftly. To further protect the painting and its original frame, the museum also constructed this airtight outer frame to reduce the airflow and the moisture that contributed to that flaking condition. And then plexiglass was used over the front to reduce the ultraviolet light that would come in and over time cause fading. And it would also help the viewer by eliminating glare and any reflection from gallery lights. So just wanted to touch on that kind of interesting technical note there on how the materials were affected by process in that case. Also wanted to bring in a study in charcoal and pastel on paper from 1932. And I wanted to use this piece to kind of emphasize again his process and think about the materials that he was using, even in preparation for finished painted works. Um, so with his mature paintings, he does these really kind of controlled renderings, but that was achieved through really careful, systematic preparation. He would often make preparatory oil sketches from nature, followed by drawings in pencil, chalk, or charcoal on heavy brown paper. And at each stage, he would edit and simplify the design so that the compositional elements were very precisely placed and any extraneous information was eliminated. And actually, in a 1940 article in a Los Angeles newspaper, he's quoted as saying, quote, "The public does not realize, perhaps, the amount of work that goes into one painting before I begin to set it down on canvas. In my last picture, I spent 2 months, 14 hours a day, including Sundays, sketching, making notes, rejecting ideas. Because I paint so few pictures, I must necessarily be highly selective before I start to work." End quote. This piece was created for a state competition, and this is one of only a few self portraits of Grant Wood. He actually suggested to the Iowa Federation of Women's Clubs that they sponsor a contest of artist self portraits. And he submitted a painted version of this drawing where he's seen wearing his painting uniform, bibbed overalls, and a white shirt. And although he placed first in the contest, he eventually decided to paint over the overalls with dark green paint. It seems that he had decided that the overalls were compositionally awkward and perhaps drew attention away from his face. But he would keep that portrait in his studio until his death. So that painting, which you see on the right, is now in the Figge Art Museum in Davenport, and consequently it's been dated 1932 to 1941. But the drawing seen here is unchanged and dates from 1932. So in this piece, it's really interesting. He has this very direct gaze, which is somewhat surprising. As an artist who earlier on had been really quite shy, but it's important to remember that at this time, he's already had success with American Gothic in 1930, and that really pushed him onto the national scene. It led to a more self assured image. He had a national following. He was delivering public talks and lectures to large audiences, and that perhaps affected how he saw himself and how he presented himself as well. He was enjoying his identity as a Midwestern painter, and he shows himself not only in his bibbed overalls, but against a backdrop that included a windmill and shocks of grain as well. These were symbolic elements of the landscape that Wood kind of called his own and used to sort of signify himself and localize himself in this landscape. The glasses, as well, that he wore could also be this kind of symbol of his intense focus. They also serve as a distancing device between the artist and the viewer, despite that really piercing direct gaze as he looks out at us. And again, we've got that influence of Northern portraiture coming through here too, as well. Some of those similar things that we saw with Woman with Plants happening here too. Now, I didn't include the illustrations for Sinclair Lewis, but I did include this drawing for the children's book, Farm on the Hill from 1935. And here he's using gouache, crayon, and colored pencil on paper. So this came from a project that he worked on, Farm on the Hill by Madeline Darrow Horn. Horn was the wife of one of his University of Iowa colleagues, and her children's book told the story of two boys who lived in town going to visit their grandparents' farm for the summer. A sort of tale that seemed very much in Wood's wheelhouse. The illustrations featured character vignettes on, for the most part, a solid and brightly colored background and featured the type of character that Wood enjoyed: Grandma sewing, Grandpa eating popcorn, and the hired hands doing their chores and the farmyard animals. And here, with this drawing that I'm showing you for the book, Wood has incorporated details from the text, like the new blue and white apron that Cora here is wearing, but he also worked in his own details, which come through really nicely with that colored pencil and crayon that he's using. So the pins here that are holding her hair in place, and those kind of blonde eyelashes that we see as they hit the tops of her cheeks. And his additional details, like the strength of the figure's arms and hands as she peels the apple, or the way that he has the apple peel hanging out of the bowl, that little coil of apple peel coming down. all of these things serve to kind of fully move us through the scene. Although the figures here appear as very broad types, these small details help to connect the illustrations to the story and really create a more fully realized character. And then finally, I'm going to finish up with my last piece here. I couldn't not talk about a print as well. This is honorary degree from 1938, lithograph on paper. One of 19 lithographs that Wood made in collaboration with the Associated American Artists, or AAA, between 1937 and 1941. AAA was a very successful New York firm that sold original prints at reasonable prices through mail order catalogs. And their goal was to provide employment for artists while also making original artworks available to the general public. Each artist was paid a fee for their work, and the lithographs were printed according to the number ordered, though it was guaranteed that no printing would go beyond 250. Wood was a contributing artist to the group, and the original lithographs were sold for about $5 each. This was something that he would have probably been quite comfortable with. He appreciated that idea of creating art in a way that was more accessible for the general public. And for his prints, he continued to use those themes that he had become known for: farming, the changing seasons, and small town life. Although here we're seeing a little representation of higher learning, academia coming through here. So in 1934, he had accepted a position as an associate professor of art at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. And that was an offer that was viewed skeptically by many professors at the university as a public relations ploy. And Wood, as well, knew that he was perhaps not the most academically qualified candidate for a professorship, as his formal education had ended with his graduation from Cedar Rapids High School a quarter century earlier. And while the University of Iowa never conferred an honorary degree on Grant Wood, the University of Wisconsin-Madison did in 1936, and Lawrence College in Appleton, Wisconsin followed suit in 1938. So here, he's kind of satirizing himself. He's poking fun at this solemn ritual of pomp and circumstance. And looking at the details, we see in the background a Gothic window lets in this kind of heavenly light over the ritual. And this very depicted as very rotund Grant Wood receives a diploma and sash, and the sash mirrors that pointed Gothic arch. He receives these things from two lanky academics who were modeled after two of his friends from the University of Iowa. And again, it's this kind of study in contrast as the humble farm boy receives recognition from exalted academia. He was, of course, honored to receive these accolades, but he still viewed them a little bit with kind of a grain of salt and a degree of amusement as well. So I will finish up there after this kind of whirlwind tour of many different mediums, just a brief overview of some of those many things that he worked in over the course of his career. So thank you so much. I appreciate you listening.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. That's that survey is just awesome. Point of departure for us. Does anybody have any questions? I see Steve Hankin chatted that he thought, maybe you know this off the top of your head, Julia, that Wood had attempted to paint his mother, but she was too fidgety, so he put the plant in her hands to settle her
Uh,
down. Is that a
that
thing?
that sounds familiar. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it definitely sounds like it could be a possibility.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Well, does
Julia,
any
this is Paul Jewell.
Hi, Paul.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Excellent program tonight. I really enjoyed it very
Oh,
much.
thank you.
I was just wondering about the lilies of the valley or of the alley,
Mhm.
and I wondered how many of those are known to be in collections here in Iowa or in some other state.
Well, I believe, and I would have to double check. I think there's four that are existing, if that sounds right. We have two in our collection, the two that I showed. The other two, and I was just thinking about this and was going to look it up. I'm not sure where they are, but I'm sure we probably have that noted somewhere. I would have to check.
Thank you.
Okay. So anyone else? I mean, I loved seeing your comparison of the Northern Renaissance influence side by side. That was neat to see. I mean, it just really pops right out at you when you
Sure.
put it that way.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, appreciated that. And oh my gosh, Joe, do you know have you seen any of these on auction? The little metal cast self-portraits? Have you run across any of those?
You know, I have not seen any of the original bronze ones in the auction houses for a while. I think the last time I saw one might have been 5 years ago. But if Sean is still in the group, maybe this is a good time to ask him. I know there's a bit of history about when the cast was used to make some more gifts. I think from the museum, I never quite knew the story on that, but some of the castings from that run have existed and shown up on eBay here and there. And obviously, they were not part of the original run that Grant Wood used as gifts for his friends. But I haven't seen a lot on exactly when the cast was used for which runs and whatever. I wonder if you could, or Julia, if maybe if you know, I'm just curious about that.
Oh, there's Sean. Um,
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I know that there was that run that happened later on, but I'm not sure how many was at that point. And yeah, yeah, I haven't unsure there.
now,
Here's
now
one.
I don't.
Hmm.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, awesome.
I'm sure this was from the museum's gift donor run or whatever that was from back in the day. This is not one of the originals.
But so what? It's fun. There we go. We um I love that you're showing us the clock at 5 Turner. Uh I'm not sure everybody's aware of the detail on that and how whimsical that is.
Hmm.
That's really neat.
Yeah, great piece. And that's up right now in our kind of Grant Wood gallery on the first floor as well as Mourner's Bench and Woman with Plants.
Mhm.
The window in that door was placed into the lid of the coffin so that people could view the body but be safe and not be the whole thing with the funeral parlor was to keep people from catching any diseases or whatever, and keeping, instead of having it in your own home, in your own parlor, having it in a central location. And that was a safety issue to protect people from disease. But of course, he turned it into something very humorous.
Yeah, and that seemed to be a theme too, just the sense of humor throughout everything. I don't think we always think about that, you know. Even though American Gothic is supposed to be somewhat of a send up too, but yeah, his wit seems to be really underscored. Thank you, Julia, for all that, revealing that theme as well. That's awesome. So anybody have any other thoughts or questions? I don't want to rush anybody. And you can always pop back in. Oh, what does this say? The Sinclairs moved in between the Douglas family and the Turner conversion. And that's from Tara at the History Center. Thank you, Tara.
Oh yes, thanks for filling out that history. Yes.
Okay. Okay, sounding good. Anything else? And the whole point of some of this too is that you can, if it's like, oops, I meant to ask this, well, just reach out. We'll get you connected to the people who can tell you something about something. So we'll make, and you can also put we can circle back, and if you think of something, we can ask Julia a question later too in the chat. So don't be shy. Yeah, Sean wasn't sure of how many runs there were of everything. That would be a rabbit hole to go down. Oh, so many rabbit holes. And speaking of which, I bet Renelle can tell us all about all those winding roads she's has taken, is going to take. And I would love to welcome Renelle to the group. And would you just tell us about your background and your some of the details and your relationship to Grant Wood and all the things that are happening, and I believe you're going to talk a bit about what a catalog raisonné is and answer any questions about that whole phenomenon. So take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. I've met several of you, and it's great to see some of you. I haven't seen you for a long time, so it's nice to see everyone again. I am going to start because I folded my introduction into my PowerPoint. So I am going to go ahead and share that. And we'll go ahead and get started. I'm hoping everyone can see that now. So there we go. Let's get in here, Renelle. So here is my introduction. Again, my name is Renelle Knight-Luth. I actually have an undergraduate degree in journalism advertising from South Dakota State University, and then I went to the University of Iowa, got my master's and PhD in art history. My areas of interest are actually World War I combat art. That's what I wrote my dissertation on. And that led me into all different areas of propaganda, and then history of design, graphic design, interior design, things like that. I did have a brief stint of employment at the University of Iowa Museum of Art, and Julia Jessen was there at the same time. Yay! And of course, the UIMA is now called the Stanley Museum of Art. After I got my PhD, I started working at Coe College. I just ended my 9.5 years of being a professor of art history and museum studies at Coe College. I just did that a few weeks ago in December. That was my last semester. Also, when I was at Coe College for a short period of time, 3 or 4 years, I was also the director of galleries and collections. So I oversaw our professional art galleries at Coe, the Sinclair Art Galleries, the Student Gallery, and also the Permanent Collection. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing was working on the loan of Coe's Permanent Collection artworks to the Whitney Museum of American Art's retrospective on Grant Wood, which was in 2018. Interestingly, 2018 was a big year for me. That was also the anniversary of World War I, and I was constantly doing lectures on World War I and traveling, and then also going to the Whitney and doing talks. And 2018 was incredible. But it really made me open my eyes. The Whitney exhibition did too, to open my eyes to Grant Wood in so many different ways. And it was exciting to see him on that platform in New York City. The question, what is a catalog raisonné? This was one of the things Elaine asked me to address, and so I'm happy to do that. Catalog raisonné is a French phrase. We could translate it to a reasoned catalog. And just a note, here in the United States, pretty much everywhere in art history circles, we still keep the French spelling and pronunciation of catalog raisonné. And simply put, what it is an inventory of an artist's body of work. Now, sometimes catalogs raisonné will focus on a particular medium. Like here we have Bruce Johnson's catalog raisonné of Grant Wood's lithographs, right? But for the most part, catalogs raisonné usually cover the entire scope of an artist's body of work. Those artworks are then cataloged, they're inventoried, and they provide, each entry includes a very detailed history of those artworks. Basic info such as date, dimensions, materials, medium, duration, whatever the case may be. Oftentimes there's a description of each artwork and including comments on signatures and marks that may even be on the back of an artwork. Many times in the catalog raisonné, we see an exhibition history of each of those artworks, provenance, which is a history of ownership, location. Where is that artwork currently located? And then there can be other materials, other information included in the catalog raisonné. Of course, the catalog raisonné oftentimes includes images too. That's kind of a key component of a catalog raisonné. Other things that a catalog raisonné can include: a biography of the artist, archival information and reference materials, a timeline of when the artist was working, essays as well, an annotated bibliography, which is so incredibly important. In particular, for the Grant Wood Catalog Raisonné project, some of the things we also want to include or we want to investigate would be the types of signatures, the ways that Grant Wood signed his works throughout his career, and then also an investigation into his frames, which was fantastic that Julia talked about, the portrait of his mother and the elaborate frame that he created for that. Grant Wood, along with several other artists like Marvin Cohn, spent quite a bit of time developing their own formulas and styles for their frames, and so we feel that that's an important thing that we would like to include in the Grant Wood Catalog Raisonné. I would also say that catalogs raisonné can be printed, published into a hard copy book, or they can be digital, and there are pros and cons to both of those things, which I will talk about in a little bit here. For the most part, I would like to draw your attention to an online catalog raisonné, a digital catalog raisonné that is fantastic, and that is the Fitzhenry Lane one, and you can see it here. I just put in there the front page for that online catalog raisonné. But an online catalog raisonné, a digital one, allows for so many wonderful ways of engagement and interaction. And I really do like the Fitzhenry Lane one. So I bring that in as a reference for you if you're interested in delving a bit more into what a good catalog, online catalog raisonné can be. We oftentimes get this question: why hasn't there been a catalog raisonné on Grant Wood? That's such a fantastic question to tackle here. There are several reasons. And one is that Grant Wood died at the age of 50 due to cancer, right? He dies in 1942. And I would even argue that at the time of his death, 1942, the idea or the development of a catalog raisonné is maybe not as prevalent for artists at this time in the 1930s, 1940s. That's not to say that they don't exist. They do, but it's maybe not first and foremost on many artists' minds. I would also say that at that time, we're in the 1940s, that there are developments within the greater art world. New artistic movements are gravitating away from regionalism. Julia mentioned how very popular Grant Wood was, how he did give talks and lectures and presentations, and his works were exhibited and heavily sought after and collected, especially here in Iowa. But by the 1940s, we're seeing this movement away from regionalism, especially out of World War II. We're seeing a movement towards other more, we might say, contemporary American art movements like abstract expressionism and things like that. So there really is also this period of time where Grant Wood and other regionalists are kind of ignored, omitted from art historical scholarship. And we don't see a revitalization of Grant Wood and others until scholars begin to publish about him in the 1970s and the 1980s. And we can thank several scholars for doing that, such as Wanda Corn. And so we see this revitalization into regionalism, especially in the late 1970s throughout the 80s and 90s, for sure. The other reason why we probably have not seen a Grant Wood catalog raisonné yet is because how catalogs raisonnés are supported. Oftentimes they are supported through an artist's foundation. And there really wasn't an artist foundation solely dedicated to Grant Wood. Did we have other organizations and other things that really uplifted Grant Wood? Absolutely, right? But we didn't have a pure foundation dedicated just to Grant Wood. Also, catalogs raisonné are supported by the family of the artist. Many times families will say, oh, let's go ahead, let's put this forward, let's do this work. And we didn't necessarily see that happening with Grant Wood, with Nan and things like that. Also, at various times, catalogs raisonné are supported by collectors. And they may have some different reasons for wanting a catalog raisonné. It's going to support their collecting habits and maybe even drive up the value of the artworks that they've collected too. So we see collectors getting into the catalog raisonné game too. Of course, galleries that represent the artists, they're going to support the development of a catalog raisonné. For many of the same reasons that individual collectors may want to see those publications come forward. And then scholars. We will see, especially art historians, start to develop their dissertation projects or whatever the case may be, develop those dissertations into a catalog raisonné. I would also say too, of course, some museums, along with galleries, are helping to push forward catalogs raisonné. Academic institutions would be another space, but it's very rare to see academic institutions fully support a catalog raisonné project. And indeed, the University of Iowa is going to be kind of groundbreaking in that area. And we're excited to sort of blaze that trail. There are other academic institutions who have done this, but the University of Iowa has a little bit different take on how we're going to approach the Grant Wood Catalog Raisonné project. What are some of our project goals and our timeline? Again, this is a brand new thing that we are just starting up. So we're at the very beginnings, but of course our project goals, it would be, remiss if I didn't say this, but promote Grant Wood. Catalogs raisonné have already been published on Grant Wood's contemporaries from many American artists who were living and working at the same time as Grant Wood. We even have a catalog raisonné on his good friend Marvin Cohn. And if we don't start to put together this catalog raisonné of Grant Wood, there's, for many of us, there's a concern that this information is gonna fall away and we're not going to be able to capture what we can as soon as we can. So we need to start promoting Grant Wood, and one of the best ways to do that is through a catalog raisonné. Of course, our project goal is to do a digital catalog raisonné. A printed catalog raisonné is very expensive to manufacture. There are all sorts of costs, and I know people like Barb Feller and Paul Jewell, I've worked with you guys in the past. We have those lovely rights and reproduction fees for all of those images that we want to include. So there's that cost involved. There's just the printing of the actual book that costs a lot of money, and then oftentimes those physical books they're very expensive for people to buy too. So we are going to go with the digital catalog raisonné. It's going to be accessible to scholars, to curators, to gallerists, to enthusiasts, on down the line. We also really want to see the digital catalog raisonné be interactive, kind of like that Fitzhenry Lane one that I just discussed, have these interactive components to it where people can really start to drill down into specific components and elements of those artworks. So really, this digital catalog raisonné has the potential to provide a wealth of information, and it can easily be updated. Indeed, once a printed catalog raisonné is published, it almost immediately becomes obsolete because there's always going to be new information coming out of the woodwork. So it's great with a digital catalog raisonné, we can, theoretically easily update that information. So another one of our project goals is to get a database up and going, establishing that database for inventorying artworks, images, archival materials on down the line. And we're going to do that with the help of students here at the University of Iowa. This project, this catalog raisonné project, is grant funded. And one of the key components to that grant is having an educational aspect that's going to connect with University of Iowa students, graduate assistant, maybe some undergraduate interns who are probably in the field of art history, maybe American studies, maybe museum studies. So they're going to get this hands-on experience with this project. Very important in that connection to the University of Iowa and to the grant funding that we've received. Of course, other project goals to establish and reinforce relationships with partners. There's a whole plethora of museums out there that we have already been working with and that have graciously said they want to partner with us. Of course, the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, the Figge, the Dubuque Museum of Art, the Amon Carter Museum down in Fort Worth, Texas, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and things like that. Many galleries, universities, and colleges, such as Coe College, which has a nice collection of Grant Wood artworks, and other educational entities. Of course, the Cedar Rapids School District and things like that. Libraries, think about Iowa State University and their murals, but also their archives. And of course, private collectors. We need to start rounding up those works that are in private collections. And then also, of course, scholars and organizations such as the Grant Wood Country Forum. We're going to hopefully continue to have a good partnership with you guys because you are on the front lines of gathering some of this really good information that we want to plug into our database and then into the digital catalog raisonné. Another goal, of course, is to establish an advisory board of select individuals with specialized expertise. Catalogs raisonné staff do not authenticate artworks. There are a whole bunch of reasons why I will not be authenticating those Grant Wood artworks that are of questionable creation and provenance and things like that. Instead, we rely on an advisory board to help us with that. So that is another project goal that we need to start working on too. The timeline, this is a 3-year grant-funded project, notably with funding from the Roy J. Carver Charitable Trust, which is also really pushing us to have that educational connection to students at the University of Iowa. But of course, this project is also supported from the Grant Wood Art Colony, the University of Iowa Office of Community Engagement, which is in conjunction with the Provost's Office, support from the University of Iowa Library System and their digital side, and then support from private donors too. Now, again, this is originally a three-year grant-funded project. We're very well aware that most catalog raisonné projects extend well beyond the 3 years of this grant timeline. So we will be looking for additional grant funding and support. That is definitely something we need to take into consideration. There are several catalogs raisonné that have been in the works for well beyond 3, 5, even 10 years. So we're hoping to continue with some grant funding that can help continue this project. How can you help? As I mentioned, you guys are on the front lines of all of this and of the scholarly work and research. So how you can help is, of course, contact me. I do have several people who are in this forum right now, and I know I need to contact you because you have excellent information in your hands or in your family histories. And so I will be reaching out to you. But you can also reach out to me. I share with you my email address, renell-knight@uiowa.edu. You can also spread the word, start talking to other people, or like Elaine told me about a history center, a county history center, history museum that has a Grant Wood drawing. So I will definitely be reaching out to those people as well. It's one of these things where we are seriously starting from the ground up. We have great partnerships with these different museums, like the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, who will probably share their information with us. But it's these private collections or these random drawings that are in, private collections or in institutions or whatever the case may be. We need to seek those things out. And for those of you who have that information, let me know. Also, I would say continue to go to our website, to the Grant Wood Art Colony. There's a whole section on the Catalog Raisonné project, so you can check us out there. But continue to be engaged with the Grant Wood Country Forum and with other institutions and organizations and things like that. So I think that is all I have. I wanted to be pretty brief and leave some time for questions and things like that.
Raynell,
Yes.
has there been any type of collection or documentation put together before this on Grant Wood's work, something that you could at least start with, that someone has done, either the colony or the University of Iowa?
Yeah, great question. So, of course, many of our many museums who have Grant Wood artworks, they already have this fantastic wealth of materials that we hope to plug almost instantly into this database once we get this database up and running. Yes, also other things too, like the Figge Art Museum did a digital inventory of scrapbooks, of Grant Wood scrapbooks, and that has been shared with the University of Iowa. So we're going to be plugging that information in as well. Numerous scholars have done research and have written about many of these artworks too. So we're partnering with them and we're getting their information too. So yeah, there has been already a lot of work done. It's a matter of kind of bringing it all together and putting it into a manageable format. And again, bringing in information from these different entities. There may be some overlapping information too that needs to really be compiled and culled. Yep. Good question.
We have a question here. Ultimately, is it the University of Iowa that will have ownership and ongoing management of the catalog as it evolves?
Say that again, Elaine. You kind of glitched out. Is it in the chat? I can look here.
No, I can fill this one if you want.
Yeah, there was a question. There was a question about ultimate ownership of the catalog.
Oh.
So if you don't mind, I can step in. Because Renell's less than a month on the job and she did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for presenting all that information. When we started discussing this, I know I spoke to Sean years ago. One of the exciting factors of hosting this kind of project is that we're working with the Digital Scholarship Studio at the University of Iowa. And this shouldn't sound exciting, but to me it was when they told me that they would treat this database as they do the engineering studies, the physics studies, and the science ones, that they're like, no, we will back this up. We will keep this operational into perpetuity, the same way they would all these other big research projects. I thought, well, this is why this makes sense to have it here. When you're working with a foundation or a smaller museum, you don't know about the longevity of those institutions and the support structure, especially when it comes to IT costs. And for us to be able to work within the university in that way, that was very exciting. So ownership, yes, will be with the University of Iowa. Management will be with whomever we decide to identify in that way. Ideally, it will be connected to the Grant Wood Art Colony as an institution, but if that were to go away, we might have it embedded in the School of Art and Art History and Design. But that continuity and digital asset management is something that we're taking very seriously with this project.
That is really exciting. It seems very forward thinking for sure. Very protective.
Oh no, I don't want to sound protected. I mean, it's a
in a good
resource, but it's
way.
for everyone. I want to make sure that this is something that we're looking at it with all of our projects that we do with the colony, is that we hope that we can put our resources toward what we can do. Whereas like the Museum of Art is wonderful at engaging the public and showing the works. So if we can be a resource to them and fund this component of it to assist the work that they do, that's what our hope is. Truly collaborative.
Well, absolutely. And I meant protective, like a mama bear protects her
Oh.
cub.
Treat it well with respect.
This group, you might get a sense where we've been talking about Grant Wood for quite a while collectively now, and it's like, yeah, everybody needs to know, but the work also needs to be honored, and what a better way than this. That's so awesome. Thank you for explaining that, Maura. That it makes complete sense, and yeah, awesome. Well,
Yeah, and just to jump in really quick. So Maura is the director of the Grant Wood Art Colony, who has just been fantastic to work with. But it looks like Steve put a question in the chat too. How about the people in Anamosa and the collections that did exist of Wood's drawings clear back to school days at Antioch Country School? We are looking at the entire range of Grant Wood. So we've had questions, are we going back to his World War I days? Yes, absolutely. We're going to try to gather as much information as we possibly can. I feel like and correct me if I'm wrong, Maura, but what I have ascertained so far is that we would probably start with really looking at the beginning of his professional career to his death. So maybe like 1910, right through there. But that's not to say that we at some point wouldn't go back to those earlier works too. Why not? We just saw the things that Julia shared, the beet and the apples and stuff like that. Wonderful works as a youth. So why wouldn't we include those, right? Yep, absolutely. Does that answer your question, Steve?
Sure.
Okay.
I have a quick question. So this is Shannon. So will there be a component of this that will be available to the public while you're in development, or is the kind of thing where you have to wait until this entire catalog is completely done before we'll be able to see any of it?
No, we would like to, we're still sort of parsing that out, but that is one of the beauties of having a digital online catalog raisonné. We might be able to unveil certain things at first, and then have a in progress, coming soon sort of part of the digital catalog raisonné. I would say too that many of the museums in Eastern Iowa, the big institutions that do have Grant Wood works, their information could easily be plugged into the database and then published on that website, on our Catalog Raisonné website. It's a matter of timing and trying to get all of that put together. But Maura, we really haven't talked about when we're rolling out and what we're rolling out, but other people I've talked with in the Catalog Raisonné community said that is one of the beauties of having that digital system. We can publish as time warrants, as we feel we're ready to move forward and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of exciting.
And Shannon, that's something that the critical mass, we feel like if we have a proof of concept, that'll also bring more projects out of the woodwork. Even the magazine article that was recently written brought out a lot of interest and say, hey, I have this, I have that. And we assume that this will be an organic process. But we want to make sure that the first unveiling is substantial enough and has enough credibility that'll inspire more investment into this. That's another thing, is because we know that this is not a 3-year project, that we will need to have that proof of concept to explain to potential donors, granting agencies, this is what we're trying to achieve. So that's kind of, to answer the question, to repeat what Ronelle said, there'll be staged releases of it.
Awesome. Because you and I had discussed some time ago, having some sort of space where people could see how they could go see this. So what is available to the public to see, and how could they track these things? Tying more into Iowa tourism, art tourism, etc. So I'm assuming that as these things are getting published, some of them will not be available to the public, but many of them could be, that somehow also could be tied into how can the public see these works of art, the ones that are available.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great opportunity a great way to promote these institutions as well. Like, you want to see it for yourself. It's not just American Gothic at the Art Institute. You can go to see all these other pieces right in Iowa.
Agreed.
I'm curious. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. I just
You
said
finished? Oh, okay. I'm just curious, because I get the Iowa Alumni Magazine, and it was such a great picture doing that Stone City in corn. And I was wondering, whose idea was that? Was that yours, or did it come from the alumni? They connected it in with their whole rural education project, so it's beautifully incorporated. But where did that come from?
That was Iowa Magazine. They
They
did that.
came
I
up
mean, I
with
was
it.
surprised when I saw it. That
Yeah.
article first came out digitally in October. So when there was a sudden fuss about it in December, I'm like, what? You guys haven't seen this? But I hadn't seen the
Oh.
cover. Like, I hadn't seen the print
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was wonderful. I was so thrilled with them paying attention. That's
Yeah.
something that the Grant Wood Art Colony has been trying to do, is say, let's own Grant Wood, and let's make sure that we repair his reputation, that University of Iowa played a role in hurting. So we're really thrilled every time Grant Wood is given that kind of attention. And it wasn't just, let's slap a picture of Grant Wood on the front. It was, let's dig deeper and really do something that connects Grant Wood and at this larger level. So we were really thrilled with that cover.
And that's just a wonderful, I can tell you from a staff member and alumni person with the university, that's a great way to connect with the alumni. They love that magazine. It's gotten so much better with the years. It's really a quality magazine. And I think things are well read from it. So if there's things that you want to share, be sure and let them know about it.
We try, but you get chosen.
Now you've got the end to do.
We were very honored, and it was wonderful at the time
going.
with hiring Ronelle. Like, if you wait another week, I can get you the name.
Hey,
Good job.
hey, Joe, what you got, Joe?
I have a question about the multiple prints, because obviously with the 19 lithographs, it'd be impossible to keep track of the 250 plus copies of each one, and the provenance and when they change hands all the time. But I would be curious to see if it'd be possible, of the 19, like which ones are owned by notable institutions, and whether or not they're on display. It's kind of neat to know that. And just the odds and ends that come from that. The CRMA has this cool reverse version of the the March version, and so there's a lot to learn there scholarship wise, and if it could be possible to know which institutions, outside of private collectors, which institutions own some notable ones. There are differences in the qualities of some of these prints, and it could help discern, like, oh, of Sultry Night, look at this museum's version. It seems like there could be things there, but it's a slippery slope right into just a lot of crazy stuff that could get out of hand.
I'll I'll go ahead and attempt to answer that question for you, Joe. And one is that different catalogs raisonné handle reproductive prints in different ways. And that is one thing that we as a project need to determine how we want to do that. Again, Bruce's catalog raisonné of the 19 lithographs is very, very helpful in that regard. But it is, like you said, it is a slippery slope. And it does become very cumbersome, but there is a way to do it, to do that subset within the catalog raisonné, the larger catalog raisonné project. It's something we need to figure out how we want to deal with reproductive prints. So, but you bring up a good point about the different institutions and their holdings, and then the quality of the prints too. That's that too is kind of gets into slippery slope, because you're not just talking about the prints in their original state. They have been around for decades, and there could be wear and tear and degradation in a variety of ways too. So it becomes very interesting when you start dealing with reproductive prints, for sure.
I'll keep an eye on how you guys handle it. I appreciate your approach and already thinking it through. I know some of the prints had very specific signatures by Grant Wood that were very different and offer some insights that are different than just looking at the stock, here's the print, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, stay tuned on that. That's a good question.
And
Yep.
Renelle also has the assistance of the Catalog Raisonné Scholarship Association. And so she'll be taking a lot of these questions to that group, because luckily we're not the first to do this. So we actually have a very contained body of work compared to some of these other artists that were prolific for decades. So, but
And
that is a question that's come up for sure.
Joe, I might say too, sometimes you just get lucky. Over the years, I tried to use some things from Disney, and they always write a letter saying, no, you can't use anything from Disney. But I got lucky, and I found a photograph of Walt Disney and his daughters watching a television show, and on the wall behind
Yeah.
it was a picture, one of Grant Wood's lithographs. So you never know. That would be great to add to the raisonné, though, Renelle. That photo would be nice to have in.
Mhm.
Well, Paul, you have been on my to-do list for the longest time. I need to contact Paul. So I will be getting in touch with you about that and about other things too. So,
Well,
yeah,
I know in
absolutely.
this one I'm going to talk about next week, there's a lot of material there that you'll be able to use. I think I've got 3 in it of the soldiers that he did the sketches for, including the one that Elaine mentioned that's in the Jasper County Museum. So,
Yep, absolutely. And we've had some other people come forward and say, I have a sketch of a soldier.
good.
And as a World War I art historian, I'm like, I'm all over that. There are multiple reasons why I need to look at these sketches of soldiers. So super excited about that. Yeah.
And
Other
that's
questions?
I put the link to the Fitzhenry Lane catalog into the chat, because that's kind of our inspiration. That's kind of our dream, to be able to do that kind of level of digging down, and you will lose hours in that website. It's so fun to click on, oh, this is the kind of ship. And I think with all of, Wood was so much more than just his paintings. We have all these other stories that other painters or artists might not have. So it's like we could link to a photo of that Disney, that Disney setting. We can link to the kind of corn. We can link to the kind of windmill that was often portrayed, because he was very local in what he was doing, but most people don't appreciate all that meta information about his work. So this is a great opportunity for us to be able to allow people to understand why and how, and and that I'm nerdy like that. I think that that's really some of the exciting aspects of his work, and underappreciated.
Well, speaking of Paul, and I want to be sure before we end everything, and feel free to ask more questions, but I wanted to give a shout out to our next session next week, which Paul will be giving a presentation on his upcoming book, Model Citizens. We posed for Grant Wood. So that is exciting. That's been a long time in the making. And so this is a big deal. And of course, an equally big deal is the recent release of Barbara Feller's book, Grant Wood's Memorial Masterpiece, which was just released with Ice Cube Press. So the two of them will be on the program next week to kind of roll around in that and get you excited about acquiring their books for your collection. Because can you have too many Grant Wood related books? At this point, I think no. You know, this group has got to collect them, as many as possible, and pass them on to the next generation. They're all timeless at this point. You know, the great masters got nothing on us. So there you go. And then, of course, we'll have more presentations coming up, which are going to be very exciting, including Beyond the Brush, unveiling Grant Wood, the writer, with Joe Coffey. Really looking forward to that. That's on the 21st. On the 28th, the Grant Wood Florilegium, commonplace notes on the horticultural significance, symbolism, and meaning of the plants depicted in the artist's works. That is awesome. When that's with Tom Hovren. And on February 4th, the new book feature, the research that Dorothy Bunny Montgomery has been doing on the Stone City author, and what she's kind of unveiled as she's going through that process. And then we'll end up the series on February 11th, which is Grant Wood's birthday and death week, though not exact day of either of those, with Small Treasures, the joy of collecting Grant Wood ephemera, with again with Joe. And then, as I had said earlier, Iowa's poet laureate Vince Gutierrez will be here, and people who write short fiction and poetry can have a chance to read us some of their inspirations that night for posterity. So that's everything that's coming up. And feel free to email each other, reach out to each other, to me, to try to connect. Pass that Zoom link on to whomever, however, at this point. So we don't want to leave anybody out, and who's interested. So does anybody else have any questions, comments before we sign off for this first session? It looks like we're doing great. Thank you. We want to thank you so much, Renelle Knight-Luth and Julia Jessen, for your wonderful presentations today. That was just a great kickoff to our series. Thank you for being here, Maura, so you could Pilcher, so you could tell us from Grant Wood Art Colony, so you could connect some of those dots on the whole process of the catalog, and let us meet you and see how all these different elements are starting to come together through people. So that's the big thing. And it's nice to see everybody. Does anybody else have anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to just kind of say, all good things must come to an end, they say.
Thank you, Elaine, for all your work.
You're welcome. And I'll look forward to seeing everybody next week again. Same time, same place. Take care, everybody.